Well, folks, here again, it's time for the weekly forecast. But before we get to the direct forecast, let's take a look at what's happened over the last week. Of course, we had the frontal boundary that moved through on Sunday that did generate some isolated thunderstorms, especially as you got into extreme southeastern Nebraska and around the Omaha metropolitan area. And then we had that cool down. And when as the warm air started to build toward the east, we did see some precipitation break out from southwest to northeast Nebraska. During the Tuesday afternoon time frame, precipitation totals were fairly light. And then, of course, with that front slowly moving toward the east and the accumulation of heat and moisture, we did finally break the cap, so to speak, as we got into Thursday and then again yesterday with thunderstorm development, particularly over the eastern half of the state, and very welcome moisture. In terms of the drought, we have seen another northward expansion of the drought area from Kansas, now incorporating all of the southern tier counties of Nebraska in what we would consider moderate drought conditions, with the possibility that we'll have to upgrade some areas to severe if we return to some very dry weather here in the future. And of course, the panhandle, that dryness area is expanding eastward, and abnormally dry conditions cover almost the entire state outside of northeastern Nebraska. Now, as we go forward in time, we'll be looking at these frontal boundaries working into our region. We need to see this precipitation because the long-range models are indicating a very warm and dry pattern to establish itself as we get toward the end of next week. Let's take a look at the upper air models and see what we can expect as we go through this next 7-day period. And the first thing I'll draw your attention to is the piece of energy that was responsible for our cold front is now moving toward our east. So for today, we are going to expect pretty much highs in the lower 80s to maybe the upper 80s across extreme southern Nebraska. And we'll be looking for another wave coming in from the northwest, and it's going to slowly again move toward the northern plains. So we do have chances of precipitation, and the Sunday time frame is probably going to be more across the northern part of the state, closer to this frontal boundary. We'll be looking at highs that will be primarily in the upper 80s to the northeast, and as you get towards southern Nebraska, we may be looking at some places getting up close to the mid-90s. Now, as we go into Monday, we're going to notice the front comes a little bit closer, so chances of thunderstorm activity increase, particularly over northwest and north central Nebraska, more isolated across portions of eastern and southeastern Nebraska. Temperatures will remain in the mid-80s across the north to the mid-90s across the south. As we get to Tuesday, more energy moves in, so there's a better chance across the western half of the state of thunderstorm activity. We're looking at highs somewhere in the low 80s across the northwest, closer to the frontal boundary, and in the south and southeast, we'll be looking at 90s to mid-90s for high temperatures. Now, as we go to Wednesday, now we see the push of the cold air coming into our region, and we should start to see some pretty significant thunderstorm development if the moisture is in place. We're looking at highs in the northwest in the upper 70s to the low 90s across south central and southeastern Nebraska. By the time we get to Thursday, the front starts to push through. We get this cool air into our region. We're looking at highs in the mid-70s to the north, to the low 80s across the south. And as we get into Friday, all of a sudden the warm temperatures come in. Temperatures jump up to the low 80s north to the low 90s south. 8 to 14-day forecast indicates above normal temperatures coming into the region. And in terms of precipitation, a very dry trend establishes itself.